everybody. Welcome to today's Maine Media Alumni Network presentation with Penny Lane. I'm Wayne Beach, chair of the film program at Maine Media. We're grateful to Allen Insurance and the First National Bank Wealth Management for helping to sponsor this series. Those of you who made donations, thank you. Your support allows us to offer hundreds of workshops annually, and we have an extraordinary array of on-campus and online workshops on our website, and more are being added every day. Our guest today, Penny Lane, will be teaching a one-day online workshop for us Saturday, June 20th, developing the documentary concept. And perhaps she can tell you a bit more about that before the end of today's session. Our documentary alums have gone on to do wonderful things. They've won Oscars and Emmys and Peabodys and all that kind of thing. And if you're looking for a longer experience, we also have on-campus multi-week documentary intensives happening both in summer and fall. The one in the summer is a 5-week nonfiction filmmaking intensive. So check out our website. You will not be disappointed. Our next alumni lecture talk will be on Tuesday, May 5th with photographer and educator Sal Taylor Kidd. Penny has been making award-winning, innovative documentaries for over a decade. This includes 8 feature films, including Listening to Kenny G, R. Nixon, Nuts, Hail Satan, ? Is hers. Her new film, Wild Inside, will be released in late July. A Guggenheim Fellow, Penny has received grants and awards from the Sundance Film Festival, CineReach, Creative Capital, Chicken and Egg Pictures, Tribeca Film Institute, Wexner Center for the Arts, and many others. She's been honored with mid-career retrospectives at the Museum of the Moving Image, San Francisco Doc Fest, Open City Documentary Festival, and Cinema Moderne. She co-owns the Brooklyn-based production company, Spinning Nancy, and is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Please welcome Penny.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and hanging out for the next hour. When Wayne asked me to do one of these lunchtime lectures, I was like, I could just talk about my own work or like do an artist talk, and that would be like sleepwalking for me. But I decided to challenge myself and use this as an opportunity to kind of try to like think a little deeper about a series of questions that had been kind of floating around in my mind, and maybe hear from you all and get a little further in my thinking by the end of the talk. So I really do want to hear your thoughts and questions about this. I'm going to be covering like about 150 really big ideas in the next like 40 minutes. So really, I'm very curious to hear any thoughts you have about like any of these topics and how you're thinking about these things in your own lives. I know we have so many brilliant people in this alumni network. So I called this talk The Future of Documentary, and it's really not a lecture. It's really just a series of questions that I'm asking myself and the people around me as we look to the future. The questions that I'm asking are kind of roughly sort of grouped around these 3 subtopics. One is generative AI, another is reality TV, and the third is social media. And with all 3 of these kind of like topic areas, what I'm thinking about is how does documentary exist within the landscape today in relationship to these 3 large trends in culture and art? And also, how will documentary continue to exist or not continue to exist into the future, given where these 3 trend lines are going? So I'm going to spend probably the most time on the first section, generative AI, and that's just because I have spent the most time thinking about it and I have the most slides prepared for that. And then I'm going to speed through some other questions about reality TV and social media, and then open it up for discussion as quickly as I can. So with that, I'll dive in. I guess the first thing I should say is that for anyone who doesn't know what I mean by generative AI, there's like a lot of different things with AI, and I think the conversation gets confusing because people don't differentiate between different types of AI. There's basically like machine learning AI. And then when I talk about, which is like fancy Google search or other ways of putting it, but process-based. When I speak of generative AI, I mean a separate category of AI that is about, like it says, generating images and sounds from scratch with no photographic starting point, like just completely invented, fabricated images and sound. And obviously, this over the last, just even the last year or 6 months, the capabilities on that front have changed so quickly and so dramatically that it's been causing a lot of us to ask a lot of questions about what we can or can't trust in the images we see before us. So, the first thing I would say is that in some ways, this conversation is very old. Um, the When I think about what the movies are, when I think about what cinema is, I really do think it boils down to like technology plus storytelling. I think that's what it's been from the beginning. Um, I take for granted that documentary is a part of cinema. You could have some questions about that, and you might think it's not, but I will take that for granted for the purposes of this conversation. And with that, I mean it's a whole medium that kind of derives largely from the technical and scientific and evidentiary power of the photographic image married with storytelling. So that's why we have our Muybridge here on the left. And on the right, I just put in one of my favorite early storytellers of cinema, Buster Keaton. Um, and come back. Oops, sorry. One more. So, right. So before there was anything called documentary, there were people making early movies. And there's a lot of different traditions you could look at. But for today, I'd say the Lumiere brothers and these short films they made called Actualities is a pretty decent place to start for a sort of history of documentary cinema. Where they set up a camera and they captured 30 seconds, I think it's 30 seconds, of workers walking out of a factory. And there's a few things that we take for granted with this image. And by the time this image was created, photography had already assumed its mantle of the kind of most scientific, most objective, least manipulated sort of form of capturing reality that has ever existed in the history of humankind, which is such a significant change that I feel like we could just stop there and spend the rest of the day thinking about that. But it was so when we add motion to this image, we're simply extending in many ways like that sort of power to represent reality that we saw in photography. The word documentary didn't really come into existence for another 40, 50 years. The sort of person that people tend to associate with the word documentary is someone named John Grierson. And the first time we heard this sort of term documentary, he was talking about the film Moana, a silent film by Robert Flaherty, that was in theaters at that time. And in a review, he wrote about the film as having, quote, documentary value, as in it performed a service by creating a document of reality for all time. If you know something about Moana, you might have some questions about that, but we'll put that aside for now. And then a little later, John Grierson in the 40s sort of created the term documentary as a noun, the idea of a documentary film. And he gave it the definition, the creative treatment of reality. So again, well, we'll come back to this, but this dialectic of reality and creative treatment was there from the beginning. Why does this keep going the wrong direction? It's okay. We'll learn. Um, I just saw this movie last weekend. Well, I had seen it before, but I went to the film forum and I watched a documentary called Crumb last week. Many of you have probably seen Crumb. It came out 32 years ago now. Absolutely incredible film in so many ways. I could talk about Crumb all day, but the reason I'm bringing it up today is that I was struck in watching it. Now that it's 32 years old, it's such a beautiful time capsule of like a certain time and place. Like this is one of the values of documentary. It's one of the pleasures of documentary is that it creates these time capsules where you can see what did people look like? How did they talk? What were they wearing? What sort of things were they arguing about? When you walk down the street, literally, what did it look like? What did the world resemble? Power lines, no power lines, all these things that you see inside of a documentary thing, which is what Grierson meant when he said these films had, quote, documentary value. So we know that there could be fakery. We understand this. Like, this image could be an actor in a costume in a set, and that those boxes could have been carefully set designed. But we pretty much assume at this moment in history that if we watch a documentary, that this is probably not an actor in a costume in an elaborately designed set. This is probably what the room looked like. Maybe there's a little tweak here and there. In the Q&A, the director talked about like switching out the music that Crumb is listening to when he puts the record on the record player. Like we understand that again, that it's a creative treatment. But we sort of take for granted this time capsule nature of it will endure and that we'll sort of basically trust it as a representation of reality. But with the advent of generative AI, this was a couple screenshots I took of a particular moment. This was November of last year. And I don't even know what these apps are, but apparently there's an app called Nano Banana Pro, which I've never heard of. And Nano Banana on the left there was like the first generation of generative AI imagery, right? So someone typed like girl in cafe, sits in front of bartender or whatever. And this is a generative AI image. Looks a little fake. And then here's this one on the right from November of last year from Nano Banana Pro, which looks very real. Like I think for most people's eye, like you look at that image in the right and you'd probably believe that it was a photograph, right? So there's all this kind of discourse around this moment that I saw all over the internet, and I kept seeing the same language being repeated. I don't know if like the company, like I'm pretty sure the company like came up with this language, and then this is how this spread on social media. We'll come back to social media later. And just like that, the age of photographic evidence is over. 1826 to 2025, update your epistemology accordingly. And I saw this language so many places, and I kept thinking, the age of photographic evidence is over. 1826. And I remembered that 1826 was the date of the first, what we might call photograph. I'm not a history of photography person. Someone in this room knows way more about this image than I do. But this is an image from 1826 from a very early photographic process that created this image out of someone's window using, a camera obscura, so using the power of the sun. So that's what this date is in these claims that photographic evidence is over. But the thing that people forget when they make a claim like that was that, does anyone know what this image is? Is this image so famous? To me, this is like the most famous image. Wayne, you know this image, right?
Lewis Carroll, is it?
Okay, so no, these are a series of photographs that were created by a bunch of young girls in England, and they claimed they had captured photographic evidence of fairies.
Oh
So
yeah,
these are the Cottingley fairies, right?
yeah.
So
Arthur Conan Doyle. I remember he referenced this. He
he
believed in
absolutely believed in it, yes.
it.
And so to the eye, and this was all, it's also important to say these were like reproduced in newspapers. And so if you can imagine the low res, inky quality of a newspaper reproduction in like, I think these were the 1920s, I want to say, 1910, something like that. That it helped to sell the illusion. Like this high quality photographic image is not what most people were seeing. They were seeing like basically like a copy of a copy of a copy of that. But nonetheless, my point in bringing this up is that when someone says, oh, the age of photographic evidence is over, I mean, it's important to acknowledge that it was in crisis from the beginning. Like an image like this was completely easy for little girls to create by like comping together two different photographs and then rephotographing it. It didn't take Nano Banana Pro to create this image, and it fooled quite a lot of people. So from the very beginning, photography had this dialectic of being both the most objective, most scientific, most trustworthy representation of reality, and a medium that was especially subject to fakery and manipulation and retouching and things like that. So that dialectic has been there from the beginning. The question with generative AI is like, well, one of the questions is this really a break in like this long dialectical history, like we're in a whole new zone, or is this another step of a long process that we've seen unfold before us all along. So I knew that this language was like really familiar, the end of evidence, the end of photography as evidence. And I remembered, oh, I know where I've heard this before. And I recalled in my own research years ago, I'd found this 1985 essay from the Whole Earth Catalog. And it was written by Stuart Brand, Kevin Kelly, and someone named Jay Kinney, who I don't know. But the title was Digital Retouching, the End of Photography as Evidence of Anything. Very bold proclamation. And I'm going to actually read a little bit from the beginning because I think it's like super interesting. Let me move this off of this so I can read it. So they start this essay where they spent a few days watching technicians use this application called Cytex. And Cytex was essentially a kind of proto Photoshop. It was a digital photo retouching tool that had like, revolutionary capabilities. In 1985, the computer cost $1 million. So very few people had it. So they went to the offices of Time Magazine and Nat Geo and like talked to the photos editors about how they were using this tool and the ethics of it and, et cetera, et cetera. And they took one look at these technicians and what they could do to a photograph in a very short amount of time. And they concluded that this was the end of photography as evidence. And they start the piece with this little kind of vignette. Some lawyer any day now will stand in court and say, Your Honor, we cannot accept this photograph in evidence. While it purports to show my client in a motel bedroom with a woman, not his wife, there is no way to prove the photograph is real. As we know, the craft of digital retouching has advanced to the point where a quote photograph can represent anything whatever. It could show my client in bed with Your Honor. To be sure, digital retouching is still a somewhat expensive process. A black and white photo like this, and the negative it's made from, might cost a few $1,000s to concoct as fiction. But considering my client's social position and the financial stakes of this case, the cost of the technique is irrelevant here. If Your Honor prefers, the defense will state that this photograph is a fake, but it's not necessary. The photograph could be a fake. No one can prove it isn't. Therefore, it cannot be admitted as evidence. So I love reading this because, it has obvious resonance with the epistemological crisis that I'm being told was just invented in November of 2025. So part of me is skeptical, right? Like this is like not a new debate. Kevin Kelly, one of the authors of that essay, in the essay himself, he wrote that we are simply returning to a natural order. Quote, for all of human existence, you couldn't tell when something was true or not. Then we had this brief moment when the photograph became evidence to prove something. Now we're back to exactly the same thing, which is that the only way to verify the truth is you have to trust the source. So in 1985, he made this claim about this proto-Photoshop thing, and then he reiterated this claim when he was called to comment on this like fake Kate Middleton deep fake that came out a couple years ago. So he's like, I called it in 85. Maybe it took a little longer than I thought, but here we are. We have now reached the end of photography as evidence for anything. So it's like the same belief for 50 years later. So again, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if I should think of it that way. I was reminded of Forrest Gump when I was putting this presentation together because I remembered reading an interview with the VFX artists who created, and for anyone who hasn't seen Forrest Gump, there's like a series of really well done fake archival moments where Forrest Gump, the Tom Hanks character, is like put into a piece of famous moving image archive. And it's very convincing, as you can see just from these couple of stills. And the VFX artists were like really worried that they were totally screwing with the historic record by doing this. They were like, this looks too good. It looks too real. We're messing with the historical record. And that's one of the questions, right, with generative AI. making this process easier and easier? Or again, maybe we think it's a rupture. Does it taint the archival record? If one of the purposes of documentary is to create a shared archive of human history that we can all agree upon and refer to, does the existence of more and better fakes essentially completely destroy that value? So this is the moving image just to remind us again what the Lumiere brothers saw when they set up their early movie camera outside the factory. And I wonder, when I look at this or I look at a documentary like Crumb, will the audience of the future have any concept that this was like a real thing? That these are real people in front of a real building, walking out, doing real things in their real clothes. Apparently somewhat blissfully unaware of the camera, although I've always wondered about some of these people if they're noticing. Or will they think it's just another, fake image? I mean, I sort of think it comes down to what you really think the value of documentary is. And I think there's a real obvious value in documentary. And so I think in the future, people will continue to want to have it, but I could be wrong. We'll see. So yeah, so to summarize a little bit about this generative AI section, the first big question to me is this epistemological crisis represented by Gen AI a difference of extent, like just another step on a long process that I kind of laid out in brief in the history of photography? Or is it a difference of kind? Is this really a rupture? Are we at square one, starting over in a whole new epistemological landscape? I don't really know. And the second thing is, if you are supposed to trust the source and not the image, as Kevin Kelly says, what does that mean, actually? On the one hand, I think it's very obvious in today's media landscape that the trustworthiness of the source has become more and more important every day. On the other hand, the image has, in every case, totally escaped its container and its context. We live in this like state of context collapse. I'm sure somewhere out there right now, there's a teenager or a college student embedding those pictures of Forrest Gump into their term paper about like LBJ and Nixon without any concept that they're not real, because those images just circulate and we don't know where they came from. So I don't know how we're supposed to continue to trust the source, not the image, when there's no context associated with most of the images, or it's just so easy to take things out of context. And then the last thing is, what do people actually want from this technology? Do people still want what documentary offers? Do they want a sort of reliable time capsule, for example, to give you the most basic value? There's other values that documentaries provide, but I'm sort of just been thinking a lot about this time capsule thing, just like an understanding that someone did attempt to just kind of give you a picture of what the world really looked like, even within all of the creative construction. So I'm not sure if I went in the right order with these topics, but these are just the order I went in. So the next topic area that I think is crucially important to look at trend lines around for the history or for the future of documentary is reality TV. This is, some of you probably don't know, the most famous of the Kim Kardashian memes out there, Kim K crying. And it, yeah, this also ties into social media. So just a small amount about reality TV in relationship to documentary. I found this to be a surprisingly under-theorized area. Kind of like, what is reality TV in relationship to documentary? Like, what is the relationship? What is the relationship aesthetically, in terms of funding and production models, in terms of format and audience expectations and genre, in terms of ethics, working practices, etc. So I've been trying to think about this, and I'm trying to think about how to picture the future of some of the trend lines in reality TV. So again, the term reality TV did not come into existence until the 90s, but in the early 70s, there was a really important proto-reality TV show called An American Family. Again, probably many of you know about this. But I just remember, I love this quote from Margaret Mead at the time, where she was sort of reviewing it in some sort of publication. And she said, I think we need a new name for it. She looked at this show what we would now call a reality TV show about this American family. And there was something about it that she just could not call a documentary. But she didn't know what to call it. So she said, I think we need a new name for it. And I always think about this because I love these moments in history where, like, we don't know what to call something. Like, I think that's like always a really important thing to look back on. But yeah, like I said, it wasn't until the 90s that the term reality television really sort of became a term that people used in an ongoing way. And it was in relationship to some of the early big reality 90s hits like The Real World and Cops. Um, but it really, really, really didn't get started as a term that everyone used and understood as a television format until the year 2000 with the advent of what people have called the era of reality TV. I think it's a great coincidence that Survivor, which was the first of these big giant, network primetime hits, this is not cable, this is not Fox, right? This is like network primetime stuff, ABC, CBS. And Survivor came out in 2000, which I always think is a really nice way to say, like, my contention, which is that the 21st century is, in fact, the era of reality TV. It is the best way to understand, I think, the era that we live in, including social media. I think of social media as almost like a side effect of reality TV, but we'll come back to that later. So, yeah, reality TV. So, what do people mean when they call it that, though? Like, what is it? And what makes it different from documentary? Some of the answers have to do with format. Survivor is essentially a game show. A lot of the shows have a competition element, not all of them, but some of them follow these kind of game show, quiz show formats. Some of them are sort of sports oriented, and then some of them are lifestyle oriented, like Keeping Up with the Kardashians would be an example of like a lifestyle show, or Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, like that whole franchise. So by now we sort of know what we mean when we say reality TV, but whenever I try to drill down into like the exact demarcation line between reality TV and documentary, I get a little bit confused. Um, it seems to largely be a matter of people understanding that there is a spectrum of creative manipulation that goes into making nonfiction, moving image nonfiction art, and that reality TV is understood to be like far on the manipulated side of that spectrum. So, one of the most, I don't know if I want to use the word famous, but one of the most important terms that was invented or was coined during the early era of reality TV is this idea of Frankenbiting. And if you've never heard of a Frankenbite, I can describe to you what it is. It's essentially taking, you know, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of audio tape of someone speaking and cutting up the words and creating entire new sentences out of those words that were never said. So not just like light editing, heavy editing, perhaps word by word editing, like cut, 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 cut. Now I've just made Wayne say that he hates Maine and, he wishes he could live in Florida. And he never said any of those things, but I've done that. And that is called a Frankenbite. And I love the like monstrous undercurrent of that term. It really points to the way that we think of reality TV as like kind of like a monstrous sibling of documentary. It's like, well, it's documentary, but it's like gross and bad and scary and unethical to the point where, when I Googled like ethics reality TV, I found like hundreds of YouTubers asking themselves questions like this. Is it okay to love reality TV? Is it wrong to love reality TV? Can I watch reality TV and still be an ethical person? It's quite remarkable the extent to which the common understanding of reality TV is essentially just unethical, manipulated, fake nonfiction. It's kind of crazy. But it's also just like TV versus a movie, right? Like there's no reality movies. Those are called documentaries. Reality TV is TV. We understand it in a format sense as well to be essentially like, well, it might mean like a series, as opposed to a movie, a theatrical length. So some of my unanswered questions are, is reality TV a genre? Is it a format? Is it something else? If reality is shorthand for just unethical, I don't even know what that means. Like I don't even have a question. I'm just like, there's something about that I find like I need to think about more. Um, Given the fact that we live in what has been called, and I would say is, the era of reality TV. The 21st century is the era of reality TV. We do have a reality TV host as a president, which I know we all want to forget, but that is like actually true. Um, Given that, like, do we look at reality TV as having expanded the audience for documentary? Or did it like eat the audience for documentary? Like, does reality TV provide much of the time capsule evidentiary value that we love from documentary, but in a much more entertaining way? There's a lot of arguments for that. Like if I want to look back at the 2020s in the future and see how people were dressing and what they were wearing and what they were talking about, what music they were listening to, how they spoke, what slang they used, there's a pretty good argument that reality TV would be a better bet, especially because there's just so much of it. So did it expand the audience for documentary or did it like eat the audience for documentary? Those are some of the questions I have. I will say anecdotally, I do a lot of speaking to college students, and over the last couple years, I've noticed that when I ask um, younger people what they're, do you watch documentaries? They all say yes. And then I ask them what they've seen or what they love, and they mostly talk about reality shows. So, like, I think that there's a really good chance that actually reality TV will exist in the future and documentary kind of won't, or that it'll be seen as some sort of like subcategory. In other words, like we as documentary people are like, what is this reality TV thing? And like, we're not really going to be the ones to decide. Like the reality TV is like such a huge force in our culture that I think documentary will be the weird cousin of reality TV in the end. I think that's a good chance that might be true. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, great. So I'm kind of like jumping between aesthetics, philosophy, history, business. Let me do some business, and this will be in the section on social media. So a couple depressing statistics. Um, since the start of this decade and the pandemic, the number of overall movie releases has dropped significantly. Streamers have all but stopped buying independent films. Theaters offer far fewer screens to non-major studio pictures in the peak. This is really the point. Overall movie theater attendance this decade is down more than 50% since 2018. And ticket sales for documentaries are down more than 90%. I mean, that's basically like 100. Like 90% is so close to 100%. So that's the bad news. And here's another version of some bad news. And this is the number of documentary releases from 1995 to 2023. You can see this boom that happened sort of starting in 2010, up to the height in looks like 2018. 2017 is really the height of the number of those documentary releases, and then it just goes down again. And this is part of when I look at this trend line, what I'm talking about when I talk about the question like, did reality TV expand the audience for documentary? If this is the era of reality TV, like what do you see in this chart? It's quite remarkable. The demand went up that much. Well, I don't know if the demand went up. The people who fund movies decided to fund a lot more. I don't know if the audience got bigger. Different question. And I got these statistics, by the way, from the Shorenstein Center. They have the citation on the top. I'm talking about who's the audience for documentary films because there's this sense that in the era of social media, we all are embedded inside this infinite screen, this infinite scroll of potential content, things to spend your time doing. And, movies in some sense are just kind of inside this infinite scroll. So the Shorenstein Center wanted to know, like, are people still watching films? So this is a poll they did a couple of years ago. Are you a fan of documentary films? Somewhat definitely, between the first two, it's 57 million Americans say yes. I'm a fan of documentary. That's good. Here's where people see movies now. This is really important too. Almost everyone is going to see it on streaming. Like, look at those numbers. Like, that's where people are watching. So they're looking at their screen. They probably have their phone in their lap. They're probably watching on their laptop. I know when I'm watching, I'm often watching on a tiny laptop screen, and I might put the TV show that I'm watching in the corner. And then like maybe right now you guys are like you have your email open on one side. Like this is like how people are watching films. So paid streaming, free streaming, cable still hanging on for that top chunk. Very few people will go to their local independent theater to see a movie. It's not nobody, but it's very few people. Excuse me. And here's the last piece that I think really, really matters for thinking about the future of documentary in terms of social media. Where did you hear about movies you see? These are people that watch movies. Where do they hear about the movies they see? Almost all of them are hearing the movies they see from social media or from friends and family. And I bet their friends and family, I'm like combining those first two categories. I feel like they're the same. Like I feel like someone, friends and family on Instagram were telling you about the movie or whatever. So movie trailers, still hanging on in a theater, but reviews and press is like very few people. It's three times as many people are going to learn about a movie that they saw on social media than they saw in a newspaper review, even though we all still want that New York Times review. Um, I thought I would share an account of this very important force in documentary film that most people I know don't seem to know exists. This is That Documentary Girl. She's a documentary, I think I would call her an influencer. Her entire social media profile is she watches documentaries, she recommends documentaries. She's not doing criticism. She's not doing like deep dives into topics. She's like, here's some movies I watched. You might like them too. If you like this movie, you might like that movie. She's way bigger on TikTok. This is the Instagram page where she has almost 2 million followers. And this is a person who, if she recommends a documentary to her audience, it will become number one on the download charts the next day. So she's like the Oprah's book club runner of documentary film. Like she has that much power, really, I guess. And so this is one of the ways people hear about films is from influencers. Another aspect of social media that obviously matters is this kind of like huge existential question about whether or not social media is shortening our attention spans, like click, 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 thumb, 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 like this TikTok kind of algorithmic thing. This is like a local news headline, which I thought was funny. Study shows humans now have shorter attention spans than goldfish. Ha ha ha. But I haven't done a lot of research into this, so I don't know how seriously to take like this like local Canadian news story summary of the relevant science, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is like roughly true. But another countervailing trend, which should not surprise you because history is dialectic and we always see this force goes up and then this other force comes up and then the other force comes up, the other force comes up. This is the countervailing thing, which is that the youngest among us are going to the movies more than anyone else. So that would be a positive sign for the future. I think a lot of people understand that going into a dark communal movie theater space is like really great for your mind in a way that like endlessly scrolling TikTok isn't. Um, but I guess I would just say about that, documentary films are not primarily seen in movie theaters. They never were, even if it's depressing that it's 90% less ticket sales to documentaries to movie theaters than it was 7 years ago. That's super sad. But that was really a historical anomaly 7 years ago. Like most people see documentaries on TV. TV has always been the primary place where people saw documentaries, PBS, HBO, etc. And then now it's streamers slash TV, whatever TV is now. So, I think it's great that movie theaters are alive and well, or that not that they're not struggling, they are. I think it's great that Gen Z is going to the movies more than any other demographic. But I also don't know how much that matters for the future of documentary. I don't think documentaries are what most people are looking for when they go to the movies. So, social media questions. What even is a movie today? In this infinite scroll of content? Like, is a documentary different from other types of content? How so? How do movies exist in social media era? And then how does documentary adapt, if it needs to adapt at all, to being part of this personalized infinite scroll of content that we all live in now. And I told you I was going to go through a lot of things very quickly, and I did it exactly in the amount of time I wanted to. So, where we should do some questions.
The first one wanted to hear your thoughts on a documentary where, a person in the past, whose story is told with current actors, so reenactments. Do you have any particular thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do, because I do think that, one of the slides I almost put up, but I didn't think enough of you would know it was, and I'll answer the question, but I'll first give you the story. There's a documentary by Liz Garbus that I really like called What Happened, Miss Simone. It's about Nina Simone, and beautiful film, really, really well done. Great doc. And I was watching it, and there's some scenes in the movie that I were these really beautiful home movies of Nina Simone playing the piano in a church, like as like a 5-year-old or something. And I was like stunned by this like beautiful archive. And then over the course of the film, I was like, oh, there's like a few too many camera angles. Like I realized that they were fake. Like, but I kind of thought, boy, those are really well done, like fake home movies of Nina Simone, like really well done. And this like sort of is even separate from the question of recreation. Recreations tend to like there's kind of a vernacular where you can usually tell they're fake. Like they're not usually trying to fool you. Like there's like a whole vernacular of like it's out of focus and it's detail and it's in slow motion, or like it's kind of obviously stylized in a way where you're supposed to understand that it's like a fake recreation. When I see these kind of like fake archival things that are super well done, I become anxious, even though I'm impressed by the technical skill that went into creating these beautiful home movies that didn't exist of Nina Simone playing the piano. I immediately thought, as I said earlier, some high school student somewhere out there is going to make a Canva presentation in their history class next week, and they're going to put these home movies in there, and they're going to not have any idea that they came from a documentary, that they were made, that they're, what do you think they're going to do? Like track it down? They're just going to see that image and think that's a home movie of Nina Simone playing the piano. So I do think that there's a sort of danger in kind of polluting the archival record. And if one of the primary functions of documentary is to provide, quote, documentary value by presenting you with like a glimpse into the real world that we share, and if one of the purposes of archives is to help us understand our own history and have a commonly shared and commonly understood, like, yeah, history, what happens when the world becomes so populated with essentially fake historical images? I mean, again, maybe this is much ado about nothing. Maybe there's going to be such great metadata on files in the future, and we're going to be able to like, know where an image came from right away, because there'll always be like maybe there'll be like a Wikipedia like effort where citizens are like, verifying images, and there'll be like, bodies that, say like, no, Gen AI was used in this film, or I don't know. Like, I imagine there's a million ways this could go, and I would never predict, because I think most of our predictions of the future are wrong. But I do kind of worry, and I do think that documentary as a practice largely exists because of like not exists because of largely depends on trust, on the trust of the audience. If I call my film a documentary, most people trust that I didn't invent like important things, I guess. Although maybe I made some fake home movies, like that's totally within the bounds of like acceptable practice in documentary right now. Ken Burns would never do it though, because he's very aware that his films are used as history textbooks. He's very aware that these films are shown to 12-year-olds and presented as true. And so he would never make a fake Nina Simone home movie, but most of the rest of us in documentary kind of would without really thinking that much about it. So I wonder how much we're dooming our own future by participating in this kind of like pollution, if that's the case.
Yeah, and there's been a number of questions about AI and archival footage and being able to trust trust it and all of that. So in the chat thread,
Yeah, I
uh,
truly don't know. I truly don't know. Like I have been researching a new film recently, and I several times, and this has never happened to me in my whole history as a filmmaker, I have been fooled by fake historic images. Like I'm like doing my research and I'm researching the topic of elephants. And so now also, Google knows I'm interested in elephants and it'll send me, Google News articles or other types of things to be like, oh, you're interested in elephants, here's some more. And I have been fooled 3 times now by fake historical footage of elephants that looked so real that I did not catch. I did not understand that it was AI. And that's why things feel different to me than they did 6 months ago. Like 6 months ago, I was still like, I don't know. I feel like you can tell if it's fake. And now I'm like, no, you can't actually. This might be different. I don't know.
Ed wants to know if in generative AI, if there's an app that will really sort of give us a traceable lineage citing the
Yeah,
information.
I'm no expert on this, but my understanding is that it's, as you can imagine, a little bit of a cat and mouse game because every time you invent a new credentialing tool, some other person invents a way around it or a way to fake it or something. So, yes, there are like ways to search metadata, and that is in fact how most AI fakes are identified is like somehow in the metadata you can tell.
All right.
Hi, Ed.
Hi. Um, so, when I was a young artist, I was encouraged to copy the masters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but now we really don't have permission from contemporary artists. And so I'm curious, how does copyright law, if it's a song or a visual image, there's so many years, does the same thing hold true?
For AI images?
Yeah, for influences in AI.
I don't know the answer to that. It's a really good question. And I think that, as far as I can tell, like we haven't even begun to sorting out what the copyright implications are for Gen AI. Like I think there's no answers yet. And the little bit that I've needed to deal with in my own practice is like, it's just proven to be like, this is a big question. And again, I don't dare speculate. Oh, but I would say something I forgot to say earlier, which is that as soon as generative AI came around, it was funny how quickly the boogeyman in my world went from being reality TV to being Gen AI. Like it really wasn't that long ago that like the idea of a Frankenbite was like kind of scandalous and like unethical, like like ooh, you made a Frankenbite, like I wouldn't want to tell anyone that. But then as soon as like we saw like in our own practice like how easy it was to like on a free version of something called 11 Labs like put in a tiny bit of a sample of someone's voice and have it spit out an entire sentence that sounds completely believable, like way more believable than the Frankenbites ever did. We started making jokes about like the good old Frankenbite. Like, like all of a sudden it was like, oh, Frankenbite's like nothing. Like we all do that. But but not this generative AI stuff. I just think it's super funny. Um, and so yeah, so there are definitely legal implications to using Gen AI in a documentary. Like if you look for anything on the internet about the use of Gen AI in a doc, you're just going to find articles about like big controversies. And in fact, some pretty big ones where films were pulled from distribution and basically put back on a shelf because the filmmakers were discovered to use Gen AI to have people in their films say things they didn't actually say, which in theory could have happened with Frankenbites, but it never did. Or as far as I know, it never did.
And I think that pretty much addresses the next question from Renee about just generative AI, how it's being used in documentaries and the
Hmm.
ethics around AI and historical docs. Somebody else also asked, what about stating on screen that AI
Yeah.
has not been used? How Authors Guild has a certificate for authors who say they don't use AI and making that list widely available. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that those are things that are going to happen and are happening, and I'm sure will continue to happen. And I know right now, especially, there's just so much passion around this topic that people who use AI in any way, even if it's not the generative AI kind, are like pretty much too afraid to admit it in public because people are so like angry about AI right now. Like I get it. Like there's a sense that AI is coming for take all our jobs and like, gets this end of society. It's a nuclear bomb. There's a lot of reasons to be scared. So people don't want us to talk about it. But I would say for myself, I'm happy to say that I used, as I mentioned, 11 Labs audio tool to like mock up, missing lines in an edit that I used to do just by saying them myself. So like, let's say I was like editing the film and I didn't have just the right sentence or idea to like transition out of one scene into another. In the past, my editor or I would say the line ourselves as like a temp, and then we'd go back later and get the person who we interviewed to like do the line and with a microphone, right? We now I use 11 Labs to mock it up in their own voice, which is remarkable. I would never use it in the final movie, or I don't think I would. Certainly not without getting permission from the person. But that said, like it did make a particular thing a lot easier to manage in the rough cut stage, and it's a lot easier to show my movie to like my funder for notes without random weird lines coming in Penny's voice that are supposed to be in someone else's voice. So I have found that it is very useful for like previs stuff, like movie poster mock-up ideas and mocking up like even dialogue in some cases, but none of it's in the final film. Hopefully that made sense.
And some interesting observations posted in the chat thread as well. Louise posed the biases inherent in AI are enormously corrupting, not only in terms of research, where it can only rely on the material LLMs have scraped up. We know the public record reflects a narrow slice of our reality, Northern Hemisphere, white, male dominated, et cetera. Likewise, when it comes to generative AI, as a test,
Yes.
Burns archive producer asked AI to produce moving footage of the gold rush. It was populated with all white males, despite the fact that Chinese Africans and women were there, but the latter didn't spend money with the traveling portrait photographers of the time.
It's a great point.
Yeah. And let's see what else. David observes that Robert Flaherty was an anthropologist interested in how indigenous people might change their behavior after watching their actions on a projected film. His South Seas Island film was funded by Hollywood, which turned him into a theatrical filmmaker. So, I mean, it's
Great
the
historical
implications are
context.
also amazing that how AI, seeing AI
100%.
also cause us to potentially change our behavior.
Yeah.
Forensic science, Jay notes forensic science has tools to identify altered images and Frankenbites. These tools are constantly evolving to address
Yeah,
AI.
definitely.
Um,
I just want to note though that if you're just like, Joe Schmo on the internet, you don't necessarily have access to those forensic tools. So it really is a question of like, I mean, everyone in this room must have had someone send them an AI generated image. Like, there was like this one of bunnies jumping on a trampoline that several people sent to me. And I was like, okay, to my eye, this was obviously fake, although it did take me, maybe not obvious because it did take me a second. I was like, I guess it could be the case that these bunnies were jumping on this trampoline. But yeah, like, so I don't know, just because we know, like, when I was saying earlier, like reality TV, it's like on the one hand, I think everyone knows that it's fake. Like that's kind of like a cliche at this point to have someone say, like, well, it's reality TV. Everyone knows it's fake. But nonetheless, if you go on the internet, it's just a lot of people reacting as if the things they saw someone do on reality TV really happened and they should have very strong opinions about it. So it's like one thing that if we like, even if we like, I'm extremely educated. I'm like as educated as a documentary insider, right? About the tricks of the trade as one could be. But I'm still not like watching every single piece of nonfiction media in a state of constant alertness and like, forensic investigation. Like that's usually a second viewing experience for me. Like if I really loved an episode of Survivor, I will watch it again. And it's the second time that I'm like, oh, wait a minute, like her bandana isn't on there, but it was before, and now I can see that they changed the order of this dialogue. So I do think that people might have the intellectual knowledge they need. Of course, I think everyone in this world is very media literate, but how we actually live through a day is very different. So those bunnies, maybe you don't even care if it's fake. I don't know. Maybe people sent it to me because they thought it was real. I mean, thought it was fake or knew it was fake and thought it was cool, but I don't think so. I think they thought it was real and they thought it was really cool that these bunnies were jumping on a trampoline. So yeah, it's
Daniel,
it's it's not going to ever that epistemological crisis is not going away. But I agree. I cannot begin to predict the specifics of how the tools will evolve to both create the fake images and to debunk them.
And then the flip side of all of this, Daniel asked, just to step away from the dark side of AI, how do you think AI might be good for film?
Oh my God, it's been so helpful to me already. Like, and again, most people that I know who are working artists feel that way about all tools. Like, tools are tools. You can use them for good, you can use them for bad. Like, I do see the ways in which some of the tools that I'm experimenting with now are not great for entry level jobs being maintained. Like, I haven't done any of this yet, but I can see a world where like I don't know how much I needed assistant editors anymore, to do all this kind of like brute force logging. That's one area that I'm looking into, like how much faster could I get like a large amount of material logged and organized? And I think there might be ways to do that with AI tools that would make it way faster and cheaper to do what I do and do it the same way, but cheaper and faster. But I am talking about a job there. That was a job that I just described that now I'm like, maybe I don't need to pay anyone to do that job. So I haven't done that yet. But I do feel optimistic about it in the sense that like I can see a million ways that my workflow could be improved. Like I said earlier, I'm not very good with like advanced tools like Photoshop and I'm not a drawer. So like thinking about things like storyboards and movie poster concepts, I have found it very useful to use Gen AI to help me mock up some of those ideas and to like look at them and say, oh, is that an idea I want to pursue? And then I usually I've never made a movie poster with this. I don't think I ever would, but I'm able to then show those comps to like graphic designers as like an easier way to represent some of my ideas. There's a million use cases, millions. I mean, like I said, as soon as I saw how easy the Gen AI voice tool was, I was like, why am I Frankenbiting? Not that I'm constantly Frankenbiting, and Frankenbiting is a very loaded term for what is really just editing, dialogue editing. And Frankenbiting really means you're doing it in a way that's unethical and wrong. So I don't think I'm ever doing that, just to be clear. But why am I working really hard to find like, half of a sentence here and half of a sentence there and like then try to like finesse it in the audio mix to make it match perfectly when I can do it with a Gen AI tool? Like, yeah, it's a question. The answer now is that that would fundamentally erode the trust of my audience and make the people I filmed very angry and feel like I had abused their trust. So there's the trust. Trust is coin of the realm in documentary. Trust, trust, trust. So right now the answer is because that would erode the world's trust in me as a documentary filmmaker. And I'm not going to do anything that would erode people's trust in me, both because it would be wrong and because it would be suicidal for my career.
There are a number of posts that we're probably not going to get to because we're sort of straining at time, but I encourage people to read those. But there are two questions. Let's sort of end with,
Sure.
with two questions that have been raised. One by Naomi. How do you see that changing the industry, though? In other words, not needing an assistant editor. How do early career people get experience and grow if those jobs disappear?
Literally, I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm saying I don't say this with like a complete sense of optimism. Like, on the one hand, I am like a small business owner. I'm trying to make films. There's a lot of downward pressure on budgets, like a lot of downward pressure on budgets coming from the industry side. I have to figure out ways to make films cheaper or I can't make films. So, of course, I'm like, well, where are places where I could use these new tools to make films cheaper? So, and again, I haven't done any of this yet. So I'm just like sort of speculating and wondering and thinking. But yeah, what was my first job? My first job was quite literally sitting in a dark room one summer logging tape for a filmmaker. I was doing that brute force. It was like mark on the clipboard, anywhere you see a shot of a camera between the woman's legs or whatever. It was like this whole thing. But so I was logging. I sat in a room and I logged for 40 hours a week. And that was my first job in film. And like, I think that's a cool job. I'm glad I had that job. I don't like love the idea that that job may no longer exist, but I'm hoping that other jobs will exist that maybe we can't even imagine yet.
And kind of in that vein, do you have any thoughts on the future of distribution? Is it about going independent, hosting your own screenings, trying to get streamers to treat docs better?
I mean, it's all the above, and like also who knows? I mean, it's the short answer. Given that we are in a media ecosystem where it's not a given that people will watch movies at all. Like it just isn't a given. Like there was a period in my own life where the question would be, what movie are you going to see this weekend? Like that was like everybody was going to see a movie that weekend, you know? And that would be like a normal thing to talk about at the water cooler on Friday or something. Given that we just don't live in that world anymore, that there's never been more competition for eyeballs, not just amongst films, and there's more and more films being made all the time. And then there's also this like endless, infinite content streams of everything else you could ever imagine. Like, who amongst us has not spent many hours like deep diving on the internet? Like, we all know the pleasures of that. So given all of that, I don't know the answer other than like I personally am like trying to have a better social media profile. I'm like, okay, well, that's one thing I can do. If like most people are going to learn about what movie to see on social media, like I should probably make sure my films are represented on social media. So that's what I've been working on. It's not a total answer, but it's like one little thing that I think all of us could do.
And get recommended by that documentary girl.
That's right. Yeah. But actually, I don't know how that happens. I literally am trying to find out like how. I think she just picks movies, but maybe she also gets paid. I don't know. I'm trying to
Yeah.
find out. It's the world of the internet, people. We don't know.
Yeah. I encourage everybody to, before we sign off here, also just sort of scroll through the chat thread, because there's a lot of stimulating observations about
Yeah, absolutely. These are such
what
great
everything,
comments
all
and
the
questions.
implications and all the wildfire that AI, is, and all the problematic implications of it in terms of representation and, you know,
Totally.
perpetrating stereotypes and what's feeding the models. But in the moment we've got left, first of all, Penny, thank you. This has truly been wonderful. We
Told
obviously
you to be
we
fast.
could go on for hours with this because I think it's really stimulating. And you'll have an opportunity to spend several hours with Penny June 20th in a workshop she's going to be doing online for us called Developing the Documentary Concept. Do you want to just say a word about that before we sign off?
Yeah, sure. Well, so the workshop will be 3 hours long, and the idea is that everyone will come into the room with either a log line or a brief synopsis or just an elevator pitch, an idea for a documentary they're working on. Could be an idea they want to start working on, could be an idea they're already working on, but they want to sharpen the pitch. And by the end of the 3 hour workshop, everyone will have a better version of what they came in with. And the idea is really like walking you through like what are the factors that take something from a good idea for a movie into like a sellable, great, bulletproof concept that anyone would be excited to jump on board with.
So that's your shot to really spend some quality time with Penny and get her insights on your project. So I encourage you to take up that opportunity. The link is in the chat thread, and beyond that, again, just thanks so much, Penny. This has been fantastic. Not surprising.
Food for thought.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming today.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.